What happens when a man survives the worst that humanity has to offer, but discovers that returning home is an even crueler battle? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Because today I'm going to tell you a true story that will completely change the way you see the word survival. Imagine a young American soldier descending from a military plane. Flags flutter in the wind. Family members rush towards him with tears in their eyes. The entire city celebrates the hero's return. He stands there, his uniform impeccable, medals on his chest. Outwardly, the perfect image of a victor. But if you look into his eyes, if you truly pay attention, you'll perceive something terrifying. Inside, within that man, there are only wreckage. He returned home physically intact, but inside, he was completely shattered. And this contradiction, this brutal paradox, is what almost destroyed him once and for all. The war ended for him on paper, in official documents, the moment he set foot on American soil again. But the truth that nobody tells you, the truth that thousands of veterans carry in absolute silence, is that war never truly ends. It continues to echo in the mind, in sleepless nights, in moments when a simple sound of fireworks transforms into pure panic. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover about this man is something society prefers not to see. When we think of war, we think of battlefields, explosions, intense combat. We think of soldiers fighting for survival, dodging bullets, making impossible decisions in fractions of a second. And yes, all of that is part of history. But there is a second war, an invisible war that begins precisely when the guns stop firing. It is the war against oneself, against memories that won't go away, against the permanent feeling of no longer belonging to the world that was once home. Have you ever experienced something that changed you so profoundly that when you returned home, you felt like you were living someone else's life? This soldier survived things most of us couldn't even imagine. He saw friends fall beside him. He made decisions no human being should ever have to make. He carried a weight that scarred every cell in his body. And when he finally returned, when the promise of reuniting with his family became a reality, he realized something devastating. He had left an essential part of himself on that battlefield. The person who boarded that plane years ago simply no longer existed. The city remained the same. The familiar streets, the house where he grew up, the beloved faces, everything exactly where it should be. But he no longer recognized himself in that place. It was as if he were watching his own life from the outside, unable to feel the connection everyone expected him to feel. His mother's warm embrace seemed distant. The laughter of his childhood friends sounded strange, disconnected from his reality. And worst of all, no one around seemed to understand the abyss that was opening up inside him every second. While people celebrated his return, threw parties, patted him on the back, calling him a hero, he felt a loneliness so profound it physically hurt. Because heroism, he discovered the hard way, is not synonymous with healing. Surviving doesn't mean being alive inside. And at that moment, amidst all that celebration, he realized he would face the most difficult battle of his entire life. The battle to become human again. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because this story is not about military glory or empty patriotism. It's about something much deeper, more real, more frightening. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because this story is not about military glory or empty patriotism. It's about something much deeper, more real, more frightening. It's about what happens when society turns its back on those who need help the most, about how we turn soldiers into symbols, but forget that they are human beings of flesh and blood with shattered emotions. And if you're feeling something different right now, if this story is touching you somewhere deep inside, I need to ask you something important. Leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It can be a word, a phrase, even a personal experience if you feel comfortable sharing it. Because this space isn't just mine, it's ours. It belongs to everyone who believes that real stories, stories that disturb and transform, need to be told. Have you ever been through something similar? Do you know someone who came back changed from a traumatic experience? Your voice matters here, and every comment shows me that this content is making sense, that it's reaching the right people. And look, if you really want more stories like this to be told, if you believe we need to talk about the topics nobody wants to address, click that like button now. It's not just a number to me, it's what makes this video reach other people who might be going through invisible battles right now. It's what keeps this channel alive, growing, and able to bring you more and more real and transformative content. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because your participation here is what keeps this project going. It's what gives me the certainty that it's worth diving deep into these stories, spending hours researching, writing scripts, editing, to deliver something to you that truly makes a difference. This community we're building together is about empathy, about seeing the human being behind each story. And you're a part of it. Now, going back to this soldier's story, because what he experienced after returning home will leave you even more impacted. In the first few days, he tried. He really tried to pretend that everything was fine, that with time, things would return to normal. Now, going back to this soldier's story, because what he experienced after returning home will leave you even more impacted. In the first few days, he tried. He really tried to pretend that everything was fine, that with time, things would return to normal. But before I tell you about the collapse, about the moment when everything fell apart, you need to know who he was before all this happened, because that's the part most people don't stop to think about. We see a war veteran and automatically create an image in our heads as if he had always been that scarred, distant person, full of invisible wounds. But no. He was young, full of life, with absolutely normal dreams like yours, like mine. Let's call him James. James grew up in Cedar Falls, a small town in the heart of America, one of those places where everyone knows everyone, where summer afternoons are filled with backyard barbecues and baseball games on the school field. He was 19 when it all began, fresh out of high school, and had been dating a girl named Sarah since he was 16. They had plans, you know, simple, beautiful plans, the kind you make when you still believe the world is predictable and safe. James wanted to work in his father's mechanic shop, eventually take over the business, marry Sarah, have children, and build a quiet life in the same city where he grew up. He wasn't different from thousands of other young Americans. He enjoyed fishing with his friends on Sundays, loved the school football games, and had a dog named Buster who followed him everywhere. His life was ordinary, every day, filled with those small joys whose value we only recognize when they disappear. But in 2003, something changed. The news began to talk more and more about the war, about the need for courageous young people willing to serve their country, about honor, duty, and patriotism. And James, like so many others of his generation, felt that calling. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It wasn't pure naivete. It was a mixture of youthful idealism, a genuine desire to make a difference, and perhaps a deep wish to prove to himself that he was capable of something greater. He talked to Sarah, to his parents, to his friends. Everyone had different opinions, but deep down, James had already made his decision. He was going to enlist, he was going to serve his country, do his part, and after a few years he would return home full of experiences and stories to tell. In his mind, in the mind of almost every young man who makes this decision, war was a journey with a well-defined beginning, middle, and end. You go, you serve, you come back. Simple as that. Now I want to delve even deeper into this specific moment, because the day of the match was the turning point he couldn't have fully foreseen. It was a cold November morning when James put on his uniform for the first time, looked in the mirror, and saw someone who looked older, more serious, more responsible. His mother hadn't stopped crying since she woke up. His father was trying to keep his composure, but you could see in his eyes that silent fear every father feels when his son is about to go to a place where bullets are real and death isn't just a word. Sarah was there too, holding his hand tightly, trying to smile through her tears. And James did what every young lover does at that moment. He promised. He promised he would return whole, that he would write whenever he could, that he would think of her every day. He promised that nothing would change between them, that their love was strong enough to withstand any distance, any time apart. He swore he would return, and he did. But not as the same person. That's the hidden truth that no one tells you when you're there, full of courage and certainty, embracing your family for the last time before embarking on your journey. At the military airport, while waiting to board, James looked around and saw dozens of other boys like him. Young faces, some barely 18 years old, all with that same mixture of fear and determination in their eyes. They chatted nervously, made jokes to disguise their anxiety, exchanged information about where they were being sent. There was an instant camaraderie there, a mutual recognition that they were all embarking on the same unknown journey. And then the plane took off. James looked out the window and saw Cedar Falls getting smaller and smaller below until it disappeared completely. He didn't know it at the time, but that image of the city seen from above would be one of the last pure memories he would have before everything changed irreversibly. The first few months in Iraq were a brutal reality check. The heat was unbearable, the kind of heat that seems to suck all the energy out of your body. Dust got into everything, your eyes, your mouth, your equipment. The noise was constant, deafening. Helicopters flying overhead, armored vehicles passing by, distant explosions that made the ground tremble beneath your feet. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared James for seeing death up close for the first time. It was during a routine patrol. They were checking a residential area when the explosion happened. An improvised device hidden on the side of the road detonated as the vehicle in front passed. The sound was devastating. The shockwave threw James to the ground, his ears ringing so loudly he couldn't hear anything else. When the dust settled, when he managed to get up and look around, he saw what war truly was. Bodies, blood, cries of pain that will echo in his mind for the rest of his life. Michael, a 21-year-old from Dallas who shared a dorm room with James, was in the vehicle that was hit. They had played cards the night before, laughing at inside jokes, talking about what they would do when they got home. Michael wanted to open a diner with his brother. Now he was there, motionless, and James had to look at it, process it, keep functioning despite it. And that was only the first time. There were others, many others, each one leaving a mark, an invisible scar that accumulated layer upon layer. James learned to make decisions that no human being should have to make. He learned to trust instincts he didn't even know he had. He learned that fear is a constant feeling that you learn to carry like a second skin. He learned that the impact of seeing someone alive one moment and dead the next changes something fundamental in how you perceive existence. There were nights when he lay awake on the hard floor of the military base, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he would survive until the next day. There were moments when the exhaustion, both physical and mental, was so great that he could barely remember what it felt like to be at peace. The letters he wrote to Sarah became shorter and shorter, more generic, because how do you describe to someone you love what you are seeing, experiencing, feeling, without destroying the image they have of you? He promised himself that he would keep the worst details to himself, that he would protect the people he loved from truly knowing what it was. And in this process of keeping it all inside, of hiding it, of holding everything in, James began to build walls around his own soul. Walls that, he would later discover, are much easier to build than to tear down. Months turned into a year. The first year became 2. Each day was a negotiation with his own sanity, an attempt to maintain some sense of normalcy amidst absolute chaos. James saw friends sent back home in body bags. He saw others lose limbs, lives forever altered in the blink of an eye. And he remained there, surviving day after day, carrying a weight that grew increasingly unbearable. But finally, the news he had been waiting for so long arrived. His detachment would be sent back home. His war, at least the physical part of it, was ending. And when he received this news, he expected to feel euphoria, relief, joy. But all he felt was a strange emptiness, almost as if a part of him didn't want to go back. Because going back meant having to deal with everything he had mentally swept under the rug for so long. The flight back was surreal. James looked at the same comrades he had served with and saw in their faces the same distant look he knew was in his own. They had survived, but at what cost? That question hung in the air, unspoken, but felt by everyone. When the plane landed on American soil, there were cheers and shouts of celebration. The doors opened, and there it was. American flags waving, families holding signs with welcome messages, small children running to hug their parents, whom they hadn't seen for months or years. The scene was beautiful, moving, worthy of a movie. James descended the airplane stairs and saw his family. His mother was crying. His father had that proud smile. Sarah ran towards him with open arms. He should have been feeling everything. He should have been fully living that moment he had dreamed of so many times while in the desert. But it was as if there was a thick pane of glass between him and that whole scene. He saw, but didn't fully feel. He hugged the people he loved, said the right words, smiled when they expected him to smile. But inside, something was profoundly wrong. While everyone celebrated his return, while the city prepared a hero's welcome for him and the other returning veterans, James felt he had left an essential part of himself on that battlefield. The city was exactly the same. The streets, the houses, the baseball field, his father's workshop, everything in the same place, but he wasn't the same. And this dissonance, this mismatch between the external world that remained frozen in time and the internal world that was completely destroyed and chaotically rebuilt, began to create a fissure that only grew larger each day. In the first few days, James tried to reintegrate. He went back to his parents' house, slept in the same childhood room, and tried to resume his routine. But the nights were torturous. Every time he closed his eyes, the images returned. The explosion, the bodies, the screams, the smell of burning and blood that seemed to be permanently etched into his olfactory memory. He would wake up sweating, sometimes screaming, frightening the whole family. During the day, ordinary noises became triggers. A car making a noise in the street? His entire body went into high alert mode, heart racing, hands trembling, instinctively seeking cover. Fireworks celebrating some holiday? Pure panic, instantly transported back to a war zone, even knowing rationally that he was in Cedar Falls, that he was safe. Sarah tried to help, tried to understand. But how do you explain to someone who has never lived through it what it's like to carry burning memories? How do you reconnect with the person you loved when you no longer recognize yourself? Their conversations became difficult, filled with heavy silences. She wanted the old James, the boy who made her laugh, who made plans, who looked to the future with hope. But that James had died somewhere between Cedar Falls and Iraq. James tried to work in the workshop with his father to resume that old plan. But he couldn't concentrate. His mind was always on alert, always expecting the next danger, the next attack. Simple tasks seemed impossible. He forgot basic repair steps that he used to do in his sleep. He lost his temper easily, exploded over small things, and then felt guilty but unable to control those reactions. The truth no one tells you about returning is this. The celebration lasts a day, maybe a week. But then, life goes on for everyone. People go back to work, to their commitments, to their own lives. And you're left there, alone, trying to figure out how to live in a reality that seems too fake, too safe, too normal after everything you've seen. James began to isolate himself. He stopped answering calls from friends, made up excuses to avoid family gatherings, and preferred to stay locked in his room in the dark, because at least there no one expected him to pretend to be okay. The bombs stopped exploding around him, but they continued exploding inside his mind, day after day, night after night, without pause, without respite. Sarah tried to hold on. She really tried. But the emotional distance from James became too great. He could no longer connect. He could no longer feel that intensity of love they once shared. Everything seemed dull, gray, colorless. And on a rainy autumn day, 6 months after his return, Sarah said she couldn't take it anymore, that she loved him, but that she couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. And she left. That was devastating for James, but in a strange way, almost as if he were watching his own life crumble from afar, unable to fully feel the pain. He had lost the ability to process emotions normally. The trauma had created such a strong barrier between him and his own feelings that even the pain of loss came through in a filtered, distorted way. The job at the garage didn't last much longer. His heartbroken father had to let James go after he had an outburst in the middle of his shift, yelling at a customer over a noise that only he interpreted as a threat. The family didn't know what to do anymore, how to help. They watched their son, their brother, drift further and further away, becoming a shadow of his former self, and they felt powerless. James started drinking. At first, it was just to be able to sleep, to silence his thoughts for a few hours. But it quickly became a crutch, the only way he knew to cope with the unbearable weight he carried. Alcohol didn't solve anything. It just pushed everything down a little more, temporarily, but it was better than nothing. And then came the lowest point. The moment when James came so close to the abyss that he almost didn't return. It was on a winter night, 6 months after Sarah left, a year after returning from the war. He was alone in a cheap apartment he rented, jobless, unattached, without purpose. The walls seemed to close in around him, the weight of everything he had lived through, everything he had lost, both there and here, crushing his chest. He had a gun, a revolver he brought back as a souvenir, kept in a drawer. And that night, drunk, desperate, completely lost, James picked up that gun and held it in his hand for hours. He thought of all the friends who had died in the war, wondered if perhaps they were the lucky ones because at least for them it was over. He thought of his family, of Sarah, of everything that could have been but never would be. And for the first time in a long time, he cried. He cried for everything, for everyone, for himself. He was there, finger on the trigger, when the phone rang. It was 1 a.m. Nobody called at that hour. He almost didn't answer, but something inside him, some remnant of curiosity or survival instinct, made him pick up the phone. It was David, a guy who had served with him, someone he'd barely spoken to since they got back. And David simply said, "I know it's tough. I'm going through it too. But I found a place that can help us. A program for veterans. Want to come with me tomorrow?" James didn't answer right away. But that call, that impossible timing, that voice of someone who truly understood because they'd been there, created a small crack in the absolute darkness where he was. He didn't say yes immediately, but he didn't say no either. And that night, instead of pulling the trigger, he put the gun back in the drawer and tried to sleep. The next day, hungover, exhausted but alive, James went to meet David. They went together to a veterans support center that had recently opened in the neighboring city. It was a simple building, nothing fancy, but when James entered, something changed. There were other men and women there, all veterans, all with that same look he saw in the mirror every day. And for the first time since he returned, he didn't feel completely alone. The therapist leading the group was also a veteran, someone who had gone through the same journey decades ago. And he said something that stuck with James forever. "You are not weak for being here. You are the strongest because you had the courage to admit that you need help. Surviving the war was just the beginning. Surviving peace will require a courage you don't even know you have yet." That spark, that moment, that human connection was what started to turn the tide. It wasn't magic, it wasn't instant, it wasn't easy, but it was the beginning. James started attending the sessions regularly, started talking about what he had experienced for the first time, putting words to experiences that seemed indescribable. And by doing that, by sharing the burden with others who understood, that burden began to feel a little lighter. Comment below, rebirth is possible if this journey makes sense to you. James's transformation didn't happen overnight. It took months of intense therapy, learning to recognize triggers and developing tools to deal with flashbacks and panic. He began practicing breathing techniques, meditation, things that might have seemed silly to him before, but which made a real difference when his mind started to spiral. He learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but rather learning to carry memories without them controlling every second of his life. Little by little, very slowly, James began to rebuild. He went back to work, this time in a different, less stressful job where he could go at his own pace. He began to reconnect with his family, having honest conversations about what he had been through, no longer hiding anything. And most importantly, he found a purpose. He started working as a mentor in veteran support programs, helping others who were exactly where he had been, in that darkest spot, thinking there was no way out. Today, James is no longer that 19-year-old boy who left Cedar Falls full of naive dreams. But he's also no longer that broken man who held a gun on a cold winter night. He's someone who carries scars. Yes, deep scars that will never completely disappear. But they are scars from battles won, from a journey through hell and back. And he uses those scars to help others find their way back too. The message that James's story conveys is not about romanticizing war or suffering. It's about humanizing something that society prefers not to see. How many Jameses are out there right now, fighting this same silent battle? How many veterans have returned physically intact, but completely shattered inside, trying to survive in a world that expects them to simply return to normal as if normal still existed for them? A soldier's true war, the one that truly tests the limits of what a human being can endure, often begins precisely when the guns stop firing. It begins when he realizes that surviving is not synonymous with being alive. It begins when he understands that rebuilding his own humanity after trauma will require more courage than any combat he has ever faced. And this story matters because each of us, in some way, carries our own invisible battles. Maybe you haven't gone to a literal battlefield, but you've already gone through transformations that broke you, faced impossible decisions, felt the weight of no longer recognizing yourself. James's journey is extreme, but its core is universal. How do we rebuild ourselves when everything crumbles? How do we find light when the darkness seems absolute? If you've made it this far, if this story touched something deep within you, leave a comment saying, "I saw the light at the end of the tunnel." Because that phrase isn't just about James, it's about all of us who have been in a dark place and somehow found a way out. And if you're in that place now, know that the way out exists. It may not seem like it, it may be hidden, it may seem impossible to reach, but it exists. And look, if this content resonated with you, if you want to keep seeing real stories of transformation, of people who went through the impossible and found a way to be reborn, subscribe to the channel now. Because I'm going to keep bringing you these stories, these truths that are unsettling but also healing, that affect us but also make us realize that we are not alone in our struggles. Click that like button too, because every like shows me that this kind of content matters, that stories like James's need to be told, that we need to talk about what hurts in order to heal. And there's a video over here about another impossible transformation that will impact you just as much as this one. Click and continue with me there, because the journey doesn't end here.